Welcome to week 17 here with Jim McCormick, and we're going to talk roster construction. This is kind of a newer segment, but we're rolling with it. I think there was a good response from it last week, and I think it helps, honestly. Instead of just giving you the stacks, let's tell you how to put together a roster, a winning roster, rather. But before we get there, you of course can go to rotocurve.com/big-game, rotocurve.com/big game, for a chance to win free tickets plus fan experience events to the big game, a 4-night trip to Houston, Texas, February 2nd through the 6th, 2 tickets to the big game February 5th with upgraded lower level end zone seats, VIP tickets to the Antonio Brown celebrity game, $800 in airfare, all you can eat tailgate, etc. So you're definitely going to want to check that out. rotocurve.com/big game for your chance to win your own free trip there. All right, Jim, we've talked about quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. Let's try and put together a lineup now. I mean, what makes the most sense to you when you're putting together your lineup this week?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've established that I'm willing to pay up a little bit at quarterback, but the more that I toggle, lineups around, it seems like Stafford is the guy that I end up with in cash more often, just because it allows me to still pay up for the identifiable stars that I want in the skill positions. So, for example, I have a lineup here on DraftKings constructed where I have Stafford at quarterback, I have Devonta Freeman, I have Jacquizz Rodgers. And the thing with Rodgers is I know that he doesn't have that receiving upside that that traditionally we like on DraftKings or even in all formats. I mean, even the half point model on FanDuel still factors in. But Sims is gone, Martin's gone. I doubt that James or any of these other guys, or Peyton Barber factor into his workload. I mean, Rodgers, I know we kind of forget that in the middle of the season he had that stretch. It was 3 straight starts where he got all the work. And he averaged, I think he had 20 points in 2 of the 3. And in the other game, he scored a touchdown. But he doesn't require touchdowns with that kind of volume is the point. If he does get a touchdown, it's kind of gravy. But I really like him as an RB2 this week. He allows me to afford Freeman. It'd be nice to be able to afford David Johnson. So I think you can sacrifice. But I went really expensive on receiver here. I'd have Jordy Nelson. I have Doug Baldwin. I have Adam Thielen. I know I'm kind of chasing last week's point with Thielen, but Diggs is banged up again. I think that's how they move the ball. And then tight end, I'm actually spending a little more than I usually do. I like to go cheap, but Eric Ebron's $3,600 on DraftKings. It's not entirely expensive. I know you're looking for some bottom dollar guys we can talk about. JJ Nelson, a guy that you mentioned in tournaments. I actually don't mind him in cash even just because there's enough usage there. Brown is kind of out of the picture with his sickle cell issues, unfortunately, and then Floyd's obviously off the roster. So, and then defense, I think we don't talk about defense much, but it's really only Minnesota or Arizona for me. Minnesota, the reason I love them, I have some cool stats here for them, is that second highest pressure rate in the NFL, and they do it every week. They're not one of these teams that where the pass rush disappears. It's because their personnel. They have Danielle Hunter. They have, Brian Robinson's pretty good, and then, Everson Griffin, and then they blitz so much up the middle with Barr and Kendricks that they're just always in the pocket. It's always effective. It's kind of insane how bad this team has been record-wise with how good the defense is talent-wise. But yeah, so you add up that, and then the fact that Matt Barkley, since he's taken over, is 33rd among 35 quarterbacks against the blitz, or actually just under pressure rather, since week 11, and he only nets 2.6 yards per dropback. That sounds really bad because it is. And he had five interceptions last week, so there's upside. And then Arizona, you don't need to oversell the fact that you're facing Jared Goff. The Cardinals, again, are top 3 in blitz rate. And then Goff has been sacked on 9% of his dropbacks this year, second most in the league among players with 150 attempts. So I like those defenses. They're not the most expensive defenses, which is always helpful, particularly the Cardinals. They're only $3K on DraftKings. But I think to surmise it, not just to list players, I think it's a week where I'm willing to pay up at almost every wide receiver spot. And like you said in the wide receiver segment, it's okay to pay up for 2 receivers this week. I'm comfortable going with a Jacquizz Rodgers or, say, an Alex Collins. If he ends up getting the start, that'd be really identifiable. There's enough value at running back, I think, where you can go pay down for DeLangelo Williams, who's over in Pittsburgh, Jacquizz Rodgers, even Dion Lewis. Get those guys in your RB2 spot and pay up at the RB1. If I'm not going to have David Johnson, it's going to be Devonta Freeman. Can you give me an example? What's a lineup that you're working with?
All right, so I'm just playing around. I haven't obviously set my cash lineup with. First
Right.
of all, I'm going to disagree with you on defense. I think there's one defense that stands out specifically on DraftKings
Okay.
where it's going to help you get exposure everywhere else, and that's the Jets at home against Buffalo and EJ Manuel. I
Okay.
think it was Matt Dolkin who tweeted it earlier today that EJ
It's a good
Manuel
one.
has a career touchdown to interception
No,
ratio
he's
of
terrible.
19 to 19. So he's just so bad. I mean, there's nothing special about this Jets defense,
Hard thing
but
is couldn't they run all day? I mean, the Jets, but the Buffalo still has one of the best offensive lines. I'm not advocating for the Bills. I'm just saying
right.
he might only have to pass 15 times.
That is certainly a possibility, but for 2,300 to kind of spend everywhere else, I'm willing to take the shot.
Yeah, that's a significant savings.
Yeah, I mean, even if he throws the ball 20 times, they could be 2 interceptions in there, which is what I'm looking for. So I like the Jets at 2,300, and then that allows you, if we're going Stafford, you could pay up for multiple spots. I mean, one of the options that I'm looking at, let's say you go David Johnson, Jordy Nelson, and Mike Evans. You could spend up for all three, but then you're going to have to spend down everywhere else. But, for me, I like guys like Frank Gore this week. I mentioned Brandon LaFell. I mentioned Anquan Bolden. I mean, any of those guys you could plug in, and then you got minimum for a tight end. That's definitely one way to do it. If you don't want to spend up for a Mike Evans, I then went ahead and changed that out and changed out Frank Gore and put in Mark Ingram and Michael Thomas instead. So that's a strong lineup right there. One featuring, Stafford, Johnson, Ingram, Nelson, Thomas, LaFell, Bolden. And then your pick of, kind of a mid-tier tight end below 3,000. I mean, that's what I'm looking at for roster construction, especially for cash games. Again, like we've been mentioning, you can spend up for multiple receivers. You could spend up for multiple receivers and David Johnson if you don't spend up for one of the quarterbacks. So I think that I prefer the route of going Stafford and then getting the guys from the offenses I like thrown in there as opposed to going, Aaron Rodgers and going that route. I mean, the Stafford Bolden connection, it's still got, like tournament upside, but it's still viable for cash because, I think that Detroit's going to be throwing so often at home against Green Bay, either to compete with them or just because that's the way to beat this defense. So that's what I like for roster construction. Do you want to say anything else maybe about tournament construction this week?
Yeah, I think in tournament construction, I think there's an angle where you can actually you can avoid Johnson and avoid the super pay up guys, and I think there's more value in the bottom rungs just usage wise. I mean, the thing is that there's not many cheap receivers, maybe outside of LaFell, outside of Steve Smith, that I think can get 10 plus targets. I think you're kind of banking on big plays, with the JJ Nelson crowd, as opposed to volume and kind of a high floor, which is natural. But there's enough running backs this week, I think, because of the Week 17 nature and of some late news that broke afterwards. Like, for example, Jaquiz Rodgers or a Pittsburgh back. I mean, DeAndre Williams is at the floor on FanDuel, and if it's Fitzgerald Toussaint, I don't mind that either. Dion Lewis, who I mentioned, is a guy who could get, if you can get 15 touches in a Patriots offense for $4K on DraftKings, which is what he cost. I'm interested. And so what I'm saying is in tournaments, I'm actually okay spending, 8,000 on my backfield altogether, as opposed to spending 9,800 just on David Johnson. Not that would be my model everywhere, but cash, you're going to have a more consistent build. Whereas with tournaments, if you want to play around with different models, I think spending down at running back and don't set an arbitrary number. But what I'm saying is you can stay below 9K or right around that on DraftKings, just to use them as the market example, and then spend up big time on receiver. That's how you can get JJ Nelson, Edelman, Baldwin, these guys who have the cost certainty that we want, but they also have that crazy ceiling. I mean, Edelman has a 30% target share of the best offense in the AFC. Baldwin, it had a career high in yards and targets last week. So there's all these examples. Nelson has this incredible rapport with Rodgers right now. Those guys all have that 30-point ceiling that we covet, and I think you can get to that and still actually have 20 touches per running back, which is really rare, and it's kind of a function of this week.
Yeah, I'm just kind of playing around. I'll give you one more roster construction before we go. For tournaments, if you do want to fade David Johnson, kind of like you're alluding to,
Yep.
then you can go something like Stafford, Freeman, and Ingram. So you got guys, from that game that we want to have exposure to. You could go either Mike Evans or Jordy Nelson. You could have Edelman as a wide receiver too. Then you can afford Golden Tate instead of Anquan Bolden if you want to go that route. And I think his, targets are a lot safer. You got the Stafford to Tate hookup. And then instead of spending minimum, I mean, I can afford a Dennis Pitta tight end. So now I'm loving this lineup from top to bottom. Freeman definitely has the upside of a David Johnson this week. It's just a matter of,
Right.
how the game flow goes. So, I agree with you. For tournaments, I definitely like the top to bottom approach this go around. I think everyone in this lineup could get me 25 fantasy points, and that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, you're looking for it to top 200 points and to scale and to be competitive, especially this is a week. Obviously, there's no bye weeks, but every single game is on Sunday. So there's a lot of player pool there, right? I mean, these tournaments are going to be full of players. And this is the only day of the season where every single team plays on one day. So that's just, I mean, just to speak to differentiation, you want to be creative.
Definitely. So let's end there because I think we just gave some pretty sweet lineups. You guys want to use it? You want to use variations? Go ahead. I mean, this is just us playing around. So it shows you how many lineup possibilities there definitely are this week. But before we go, rotocurve.com/big game, rotocurve.com/big-game. Go ahead, check it out, win some free tickets and fan experience events to the Big Game 51 from February 2nd to the 6th. Jim, good luck this week, the final week of the regular season. We haven't won the million yet, but I think this is our week.
Yeah, we might be back for the playoffs. We haven't determined that yet, but this is a good week to do it, right? I mean, the best things come to those who wait, and I think there's a lot of value here in this week, so it's interesting. And yeah, it's also a great way to continue fantasy football. You don't need to be depressed about your season-long league. You can move on.
Yeah, I was going to say that, I hate week 17s. Usually I don't do them in my regular season, but I really like this week. We've just been talking about it. I think this is a week that I will have a ton of volume out there because I think there is an advantage for those who do their homework this week. And clearly it sounds like we've done our homework. So that's all for us. We had fun with you this season. If we're not back, if we are back, we'll talk to you next week. But good luck this week in a week 17 that should be filled with thrills.